and she had exactly 14 days before strangers changed the locks on the only home her biracial son had ever known, and bills lay scattered across the kitchen table like a death sentence written in red ink. Then, in the dead of night, a plain white envelope slipped through the mail slot, and no stamp, no return address, just 50,000 and one line that would force her to confront the white father she had spent her life hating. And the kitchen bulb flickered weakly above the scarred wooden table where Emily Thompson sat alone. Past midnight, the house held its breath, and only the refrigerator's low hum and the occasional groan of old floorboards broke the silence. Red, stamped final notices stared back at her: bank, electric, water, and the mortgage was 3 months behind. That morning's eviction notice had arrived in the same mail as the grocery flyers, and bold black letters screaming a "FOUR TDAYS to KITA OR fake illegal." 3 years earlier, Tom had died on the highway coming home from third shift, and one moment he was alive, teasing Jake about his superhero obsession, promising a fishing trip next summer. The next he was gone, and Emily buried him under gray skies on a Tuesday, then buried her grief under double shifts. Waitress by day at the diner on Main Street, and office cleaner by night in the half-empty strip mall across town. She told herself it was temporary. She told Jake everything was fine, but the truth was carving hollows under her dark brown skin. Jake slept in the next room, curled tight under his faded Spider-Man blanket, and medium, brown skin catching the soft glow of the nightlight, curly hair spilling across the pillow. He used to ask about his dad all the time, and lately the questions had changed. Mom, why do kids at school keep asking if I'm adopted? Or, why do some people stare when we walk together? She would force a smile and say, people are just curious, baby, and change the subject. He didn't know the Wi-Fi had been cut 2 weeks ago. And he didn't know she'd sold her wedding ring last month to buy groceries. He didn't know they might end up on Aunt Lisa's couch in 14 days. Emily rubbed her eyes, and the skin raw from crying where no one could see. 35 years old, but the weight of survival made her feel 50. Her coiled black hair was pulled into a messy bun, and hands rough and nails chipped from years of scrubbing floors that weren't hers. She stared again at the eviction date, circled in red: 14 days. And 14 days until the locks were changed on the only home Jake had ever known. The house was small, peeling paint on the porch, and leaky faucet that dripped like a metronome, backyard that flooded every spring, but it was theirs, and it still carried the faint scent of Tom's aftershave in the hallway closet. It still had the height chart penciled on the kitchen door frame, and marking Jake from 3 feet to 4 foot, 2 in careful black lines. She rose on unsteady legs and walked to the sink. The faucet coughed cold water. She filled a glass, and drank half, then slammed it down so hard it cracked along the rim. Tears came fast, hot, silent. She braced her palms on the counter and let them fall into the basin. And, "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Sleep never came. She sat on the couch in darkness, scrolling old photos on her dying phone battery. And Tom cradling newborn Jake, the 3 of them at the county fair with cotton smeared on Jake's cheeks. Jake's first kindergarten day clinging to her leg, and she saved every image to a folder labeled, "Remember." As if memories could pay the mortgage. Morning arrived gray and heavy. She woke Jake gently. "School time, and buddy," he groaned, rubbed sleepy eyes, then smiled. "Can I have cereal with the chocolate bits?" She nodded, and even though the box was nearly empty, and she'd been stretching every serving. While he ate, she packed his lunch, peanut butter on the last slices of bread, and a softening apple. She kissed his forehead. "Have a good day. Love you to Moon. Love you to Pluto and back," he answered, their made-up line from better days, and after dropping him at the bus stop, she drove to the diner. Regulars asked how she was holding up. "Fine," she said, smile practiced and thin, and on break she called the bank again, pleaded for one more extension. The voice on the line was kind but final. "Love, extended twice already, ma'am." The notice stands. And that evening Jake did homework at the table while she reheated spaghetti. He talked excitedly about his volcano project. She nodded, forcing enthusiasm, and while panic clawed inside her ribs. 14 days, 12 now. She tucked him in at 8:30, read 2 chapters of his favorite adventure book, kissed his forehead, and sweet dreams, Jake. He hugged her fiercely. "You too, Mom. Don't stay up too late worrying." She froze in the doorway. He knew. Of course he knew. And in the dark living room she sat staring at shadows. The house felt like it was shrinking around her. She thought about calling her sister, swallowing pride, and asking to move in. But Lisa had 3 kids and a husband already stretched thin. She couldn't do that to them. Then the mail slot clattered. She frowned, and mail didn't come this late. On the floor lay a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just her name in careful cursive Emily Thompson, and her heart slammed against her ribs as she tore it open. Inside it a cashier's check for $50,000. And one folded note, same neat handwriting, and, for the home you deserve. Use it wisely. The rain drummed steadily at the roof as Emily Thompson sat hunched at the kitchen table, and the eviction notice glowing under the single bare bulb like an accusation carved in red ink. It was well past 11, and the house wrapped in silence except for the persistent drip of the leaky faucet and Jake's soft breathing drifting from the bedroom down the hall. And she had read the document 4 times already, each pass etching the deadline deeper into her bones. 14 days. 14 days until the locks were changed, and until she had to look her 10-year-old son in his warm brown eyes and explain why their home, the only one he'd ever known, was no longer theirs. And exhaustion pressed against her skull like a weight. 3 years of double shifts had carved lines into her dark brown skin, hollowed her cheeks, and left her coiled black hair perpetually pulled into a tight bun to keep it out of the way, while she scrubbed floors that belonged to other people, and waitressing mornings and afternoons at the diner on Main Street, cleaning offices until the small hours of the night. The money never stretched far enough, and Tom's life insurance had vanished into hospital bills and funeral costs long ago. The mortgage company had offered sympathy at first, extended payment plans, and understanding phone calls, but sympathy has an expiration date. Now the red stamps screamed finality. Emily rose on unsteady legs and paced to the front window, and the street outside was empty, streetlights pooling yellow on wet pavement. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass and closed her eyes, and, "I can't lose this place," she whispered. Not the crooked height chart on the kitchen doorframe where Tom had marked Jake every birthday, and not the faint coffee stain on the living room carpet from the morning taunt over burnt toast and nervous laughter. Not the backyard swing set Jake still used, and even though his feet almost touched the ground now, this house held every memory of the family they used to be. Black mother, black father, biracial son, and, before the world took Tom and left her holding everything together alone, she turned back toward the table, steeling herself to face the bills one more time. And when she heard it, a soft metallic clatter from the front door. The mailie froze. The mail had come hours earlier. No one delivered anything this late, and she crossed the living room on quiet feet, heart suddenly loud in her ears. On the worn welcome mat lay a plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address. Just her name, and Emily Thompson, in careful, unfamiliar cursive. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The paper felt expensive, thick, almost luxurious against her calloused skin, and she tore the flap open slowly, half expecting another collection notice dressed up differently, or worse, some cruel prank. And inside was a single sheet of notepaper folded once, and beneath it a cashier's check, $50,000, made payable to Emily Thompson, and she stared at the amount until the zeros blurred. Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. She flipped the check over, checked the watermarks, the bank logo, and First National Trust. It looked legitimate. Her knees buckled, she sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the envelope clutched to her chest. The note was short, and one line, handwritten in the same neat script, "For the home you deserve. Use it wisely. No signature nation." Emily's mind spun. Scam, identity theft, and a horrible mistake. But cashier's checks don't materialize from thin air. Someone had walked up to her porch in the pouring rain, slipped this through the slot, and disappeared into the night. She looked around the dim living room, as if the sender might still be hiding in the shadows. The house felt different now, charged and watchful. Whoever did this knew her name, knew her address, knew she was drowning. They knew about the foreclosure. They knew about Jake. Tears came without warning, and hot and fast. She pressed a hand over her mouth to muffle the sob that escaped. $50,000. Enough to catch up on the mortgage, pay the back utilities, and maybe even put something aside for Jake's future. Enough to breathe again, and enough to keep the roof over the head of the boy who still asked why people stared at his curly hair and light eyes when he walked beside her. But why her? and she had no rich relatives, no secret benefactors. Her mother, gone 2 winters ago after a long fight with cancer, and had left behind only a small life insurance payout that had already gone to medical debts. And Tom's family lived across the country and hadn't spoken to them since the funeral. There was no one left who cared enough, or could afford, to do something like this, and yet here it was, salvation in an unmarked envelope. She stood slowly, legs shaky, and carried the check and note back to the kitchen, and she laid them flat on the table beside the eviction papers. The contrast was almost violent, the crisp white paper and clean black ink against the crumpled and angry red stamps. Emily sat and stared at the words again. For the home you deserve. Someone thought she deserved to keep it. Someone thought she was worth saving, and she traced the handwriting with her fingertip. It was precise, deliberate, almost familiar, though she couldn't place why. A chill ran through her, and whoever wrote this knew her intimately, knew her pain, knew her fight. Jake stirred in his sleep down the hall, murmuring something soft and unintelligible, and Emily glanced toward his room, then back at the check. Tomorrow she would call the bank at opening. Verify it. If it cleared, if this wasn't some twisted joke, and she would walk into the mortgage office and hand them a payment that would make their eyes widen. But tonight, for the first time in months, and hope flickered inside her chest, small, fragile, dangerous. She folded the note carefully, tucked it and the check back into the envelope, and pressed it against her heart. And whoever you are, she thought, thank you. And whoever you are, how do you know me this well? She didn't know the answer yet, but the envelope had already begun to pull at a thread she had buried deep. A thread tied to a name she hadn't spoken in 35 years, and a white man her mother had warned her about, a ghost she thought was long gone. The morning after the envelope arrived, Emily woke before the sky had lightened, the 50 and 1,000 check still folded inside her nightstand drawer like a secret she wasn't ready to trust. She hadn't slept more than fragments, every time her eyes closed, and questions circled: who, why, and how did they know the exact shape of her breaking? She dressed quietly, dark jeans, a faded gray hoodie, and coiled black hair pulled into a low bun, so Jake wouldn't stir. She left in with Mrs. Carter next door, promising to be back before school let out, and then drove to the First National Trust branch on the edge of town. The lobby smelled of fresh coffee and polished oak. At the teller window, and she slid the cashier's check across the counter, fingers steady despite the tremor inside. The young woman behind the glass scanned it, typed, and then looked up with raised eyebrows. This is legitimate, ma'am. Funds are fully cleared and available, and issued 3 days ago from a trust account managed through Harlan and Associates in Oak Ridge. Emily's pulse hammered against her ribs. And, can you tell me anything about the trust? The person who set it up? The teller shook her head gently. Confidential, but the managing attorney might speak with you if you explain the situation. They handle anonymous gifts sometimes, especially when the beneficiary is clearly in need, and Oak Ridge was an hour north. Emily called both jobs, said she was sick, and pointed her old sedan toward the highway. Rain from last night still clung to the road, and tires hissing against wet asphalt. The note's single line looped in her mind. For the home you deserve. Use it wisely. Someone had known she was losing the house, and someone had cared enough to act, but anonymously. That anonymity felt like a wall, and walls made her think of her mother, and Harlan and Associates sat in a modest brick building on a tree-lined street. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes, listened as Emily explained the envelope, and the check, the late-night delivery. After a short wait, Mr. Harlan appeared, tall, silver-haired, cardigan over a button-down, and he invited her into a quiet office lined with law books. She placed the check and note on his desk. He studied the handwriting for a long moment, then sighed softly. And, I can't break confidentiality without the principal's permission. But I can tell you the trust was created specifically for you, funded recently, and the donor insisted on no contact unless you initiated it. He paused, eyes kind. If I were you, I'd start with your own records, birth certificate, and anything that might connect the dots. Emily left the office numb, the check heavy in her purse. Back home, and she climbed to the attic and pulled down the dusty cardboard box of old papers. Yellowed envelopes, hospital bracelets, her mother's death certificate, and at the bottom lay her birth certificate, issued 35 years ago in the county hospital 2 towns over. Father's name Robert Klein. Mother Linda Thompson, and Emily stared at the page until the ink blurred. She had always known the name, but her mother had forbidden it. He was white. Linda would say, voice low and bitter, and thought he could love across the line, but when it got hard, when his family turned their backs, when folks stared and whispered, he ran. Chose himself over us, and chose easy over right. Emily had stopped asking by age 10. Robert Klein became a ghost, then nothing. She opened her laptop, borrowed Wi-Fi from Mrs. Carter, and typed the name. Robert Klein, age 62, owner of Klein Auto Repair, Willow Creek, 40 minutes away. A simple website showed a small garage, and before and after photos of classic cars, a handful of 5-star reviews, one grainy headshot, salt and pepper hair-lined face, and blue-gray eyes that looked tired in a way that tugged at something deep inside her. Public records confirmed it. Divorce filed by Linda Thompson in 1991, and citing abandonment, no contested property, no custody fight. He had simply vanished from their lives. Emily sat back, heart racing. The timeline fit, and he would have been 27 when she was born. If he'd left soon after, if regret had grown over decades, if he'd watched from a distance, and she thought of the anonymous check, the precise handwriting, the quiet insistence that she deserved to keep the house. It felt too personal to be coincidence. That night, and after Jake was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone. She found a sparse social media profile, no recent posts, but photos from the shop, and Robert in Greece, stained coveralls, handing keys to a customer. In one background shot, a framed picture on the wall caught her eye, and a faded Polaroid of a young white man holding a black baby in a tiny yellow hat. The man's smile was hesitant, proud. The baby's eyes, wide, dark, curious, were hers, and tears burned her vision. She didn't call. Not yet. But the next morning she confirmed with the bank that the funds could be deposited without issue, and then she searched driving directions to Willow Creek. She needed to see him. Not to forgive, not even close, but to know, and to ask the question that had lived inside her since she was small: why did you leave a black woman and a biracial baby behind? And the newer, sharper one: and why did you come back now after letting us think you were gone forever? She tucked Jake in early, told him she had an errand tomorrow. He hugged her tight. You okay, and Mom? She kissed his forehead, feeling the soft curls against her lips. Getting there, baby. And, in the dark living room, she folded the birth certificate and the note into her purse beside the check. Tomorrow she would drive to the auto shop, and tomorrow she would face the white ghost her mother had warned her about. And whatever happened, the house, their home, would still be standing when she returned, and because someone had finally decided it was time to make things right, even if that someone wore a face she had never truly known. And the drive to Willow Creek stretched like a held breath, 42 minutes according to the GPS, but feeling like hours. Emily kept both hands locked on the wheel, and knuckles dark against the faded steering wheel cover, radio off. Every mile marker ticked past like a countdown to something she wasn't sure she wanted to face. And she had rehearsed angry words, calm accusations, tearful questions, but now her throat felt sealed shut. The 50 Zalos and checks sat folded in her purse on the passenger seat, and a silent reminder of why she was doing this. Klein Auto Repair appeared on the right side of the two-lane road just as the sun dipped low, and turning the corrugated metal roof the color of rust and fire. The sign was faded but legible, the gravel lot half full of cars in various states of repair, and a classic Mustang up on jacks, a pickup with its hood propped open like an open mouth. She pulled in slowly, tires crunching, and parked near the open bay door, and the sharp smell of oil and rubber hit her as soon as she stepped out. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A radio played classic rock low in the background, and a young mechanic in his 20s wiped his hands on a rag and glanced up. Help you? I'm looking for Robert Klein, Emily said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. The kid nodded toward the back office. He's in there. You got an appointment? No, and just tell him Emily Thompson is here. The young man's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he disappeared through a doorway. A long minute passed. Then the door opened again, and Robert Klein stepped out. He was taller than the photos suggested, broader in the shoulders, hair more gray than salt and pepper now. Blue, gray eyes set in a line, and fair-skinned face. Coverall stained with decades of grease, sleeves rolled to the elbows. When he saw her, and the rag in his hand slipped to the concrete floor with a soft thud. Emily, his voice cracked on her name, raw and disbelieving. She nodded, throat too tight for words, and 5 years collapsed into the 5 feet of space between them. He took one hesitant step forward, then stopped, as if afraid moving closer would make her disappear. And, how did you find me? The check, she said finally. The bank, the lawyer, my birth certificate. She swallowed hard. I know it was you, and Robert's shoulders sagged. He glanced around the shop, empty now. The other mechanic had tactfully stepped outside, then gestured toward 2 folding chairs by a workbench. And, sit. Please. They sat. The metal chairs creaked under them. Neither spoke for a long moment. The radio droned on about a lost highway. And, I didn't want you to know it was me, he said quietly. Not like this. I thought if you cashed it and the house was safe, that would be enough, and I didn't want to drag up everything. Emily's hands clenched in her lap, nails biting into her palms. You left. Before I could even remember your face, and Mom said you were white and thought you could handle loving a black woman and a biracial baby. But when it got hard, when your family turned their backs, and when people stared and whispered, you chose yourself. You chose easy. Robert stared at the stained concrete floor. I was 27. Scared out of my mind. And my own father. He stopped, jaw tightening. He drank. He hit. Every time he raised his hand I swore I'd never be like him. But when your mom told me she was pregnant, and all I could see was me turning into him. Failing you. Hurting you. And then the rest of it. My parents said awful things. Called her names. And said I was throwing my life away. Friends stopped calling. The town talked. I panicked. Packed a bag one night and left a note on the kitchen table. And said I couldn't be the father you needed. That I was sorry. He looked up, eyes glistening. I was wrong. I was a coward. And I drove west that night thinking distance would fix everything. It didn't. Emily felt heat rise in her chest. Old anger, sharp and familiar. You could have come back. And you could have fought for us. I sent money. Every month for years. Checks your mom tore up and mailed back. I called once when you were 5. She hung up. And after that, I stayed away. Thought it was kinder. Thought you'd be better off without a white man who couldn't stand up when it mattered. Kinder. Her voice rose, and trembling. I grew up thinking you hated me. That I wasn't worth staying for. Mom carried that hurt until the day she died. She never forgave you, and never let me forget what a white man's fear cost us. Robert flinched like he'd been struck. I never hated you. Not for 1 second. I followed you from afar. And clippings from the local paper when you graduated high school. Your wedding announcement. When Jake was born, I drove to the hospital parking lot and sat there for hours, and too ashamed to go inside. I saw Tom's obituary. Saw the house going into foreclosure. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, and Emily wiped her eyes roughly with the sleeve of her hoodie. You were at Mom's funeral. Back row. Black coat. Left before anyone noticed. Silence stretched, and thick with everything unsaid. Why the envelope? She asked. Why anonymous? Because I didn't deserve your forgiveness. Still don't. And I just wanted you and Jake to have a home, a safe place. The way I never gave you. I thought if you never knew it was me, and you could take the money without the weight of who sent it. Without having to look at the white man who ran when things got hard. She studied his face, and the same hesitant smile from that faded Polaroid on his office wall. The same blue-gray eyes she sometimes caught glimpses of in Jake's lighter moments. And I have a son, she said softly. Jake, he's 10. He asks why people stare. And he asks why his hair is curly like mine. But his eyes sometimes look like yours in the old pictures I never showed him. Robert's breath hitched, and I'd give anything to meet him. But only if you want that. No pressure, no expectations. Emily looked around the shop at the tools neatly hung on pegboard and the cars waiting to be fixed, the life he'd built alone. Then back at him. Then oh no, if I can forgive you, she said. Not today. Maybe not ever. But thank you, and for the money. For caring enough to do it, even if you hid behind anonymity. He nodded, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. That's more than I deserve, and she stood. He stood too uncertain. I need time, she said. Take all you need. She turned toward the open bay door, then paused. The Polaroid on your wall, and the one with the baby in the yellow hat. That's me, isn't it? Robert smiled, small and broken. Yeah. First and last picture I ever took of you, and kept it right there so I'd never forget what I threw away. Emily nodded once, throat too tight for more words. She walked out into the cooling evening air, and the Mustang in the bay gleamed under the lights. Behind her, the shop door stayed open. She got in her car, started the engine, and sat there a moment, hands on the wheel. And she didn't know what came next: forgiveness, distance, something in between. But for the first time in 35 years, the ghost had a face, and he had finally said he was sorry. The shop's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Emily and Robert sat facing each other on the folding chairs, and the air still carried the sharp tang of motor oil and metal, but the space between them felt heavier now, charged with 35 years of silence finally cracking open. And Emily's hands rested in her lap, fingers knotted so tightly the knuckles showed pale against her dark brown skin. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and staring at the stained concrete as if the answers were written there in grease. "I need to tell you the rest," he said quietly. "And the parts I couldn't say when you first walked in." Emily nodded once, barely a movement. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear it, but she also couldn't leave without knowing. "When I left," Robert began, voice rough, "I didn't just disappear. I tried to make it right the only way I knew how. And every month, starting the month after you were born, I mailed a check to your mother. $50 at first, whatever I could scrape together from odd jobs. Later, and when the garage started turning a profit, it was 200, then 5. I never missed a month for 15 years. Emily's breath caught. "Mom never told me, and she never cashed them either." Robert's voice cracked. "Every single one came back in the mail, torn in half, and sometimes with a single word written across the front in her handwriting: no, or keep it. And once she just wrote too late. I kept every returned envelope in a shoebox under my bed. Couldn't throw them away. They were proof I'd tried, and even if she wouldn't let me." He rubbed a hand over his face, leaving a faint streak of grease on his cheek. "I stopped sending them after you turned 16, and figured you were old enough to hate me on your own terms, without me forcing money into your life like it could fix what I broke. But I never stopped watching, and I subscribed to the local paper where you grew up, read about your high school graduation, your scholarship. Saw the engagement announcement when you married Tom, and I cut them out, kept them in that same shoebox." Emily felt something inside her chest, anger, grief, confusion all tangled together. "And you were there at Mom's funeral." Robert nodded slowly. "I drove 4 hours to get there. Stood at the back of the cemetery under an oak tree so no one would see me, and watched you speak at the graveside. You looked so much like her, same way you hold your shoulders when you're trying not to cry. I wanted to walk up, to say I was sorry, and to tell you I'd loved you every day I wasn't there. But I knew if I did, you'd hate me more. So I left before the service ended, and sat in my truck in the parking lot until everyone was gone, then drove home." Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks now, silent and steady. She didn't wipe them away, and when I read about Tom's accident, Robert continued, I felt it like a punch to the gut. I knew what it was like to lose someone and keep going for a kid who needed you. And then, the newspaper ran that small notice about the house going into foreclosure. Your name, your address. And I saw Jake's picture in one of the online articles, and my biracial grandson, medium brown skin, those curls just like yours. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. So you sent the check, she whispered. And, anonymous. Through the trust. I figured if you never knew it was me, you could take the money without the guilt or the anger. You could keep the house, keep Jake safe, and I could stay out of your lives like I always had. It wasn't about buying forgiveness. It was about giving you what I stole from you 35 years ago, and a chance at stability. A place that felt like home. I thought, after everything my family said, after the way the world looked at us back then, and the least I could do was protect my grandson without forcing him to look at the white man who ran when things got hard. Robert looked at her then, really looked, and blue, gray eyes red, rimmed and pleading. I know it doesn't erase anything. I know the checks and the distance and the funeral don't make up for missing your first steps, and your first words, every birthday, every Christmas. I know I broke something that can't be fixed with money, but when I saw that foreclosure notice and thought about Jake growing up the way I grew up, carrying the weight of what people say about his skin, his hair, his family, and I realized the only thing worse than being the father who left was being the grandfather who could have helped and didn't. Emily pressed her lips together, and, trying to hold back the sob building in her throat, she thought of Jake asleep at home, of the height chart on the doorframe, of the swing set in the backyard. And she thought of her mother returning those checks year after year, carrying her own wound so deeply she never let it heal. And she thought of this man, grease-stained and quiet, broken, who had carried his regret like a second skin across every racial divide that had kept him away. "I don't know what to feel," she said at last, and her voice was raw. "Part of me wants to scream at you. Part of me wants to walk out and never come back, but another part is just tired of hating someone I never really knew." Robert didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited, and the way a man who has waited 35 years knows how to do. Emily drew a shaky breath. Jakey, he deserves to know where he comes from. Even if it's complicated, and even if it hurts. Robert's shoulders trembled. "I'd give anything to be part of that. But only on your terms. Never again on mine." She stood slowly, and the chair scraped against the concrete. She looked down at him, really looked, and saw the boy he must have been once, and scared and young and running from his own father's shadow in a world that told him love across color lines was too hard. "I need time," she said again. "But I'll call. And when I'm ready." Robert rose too. "I'll be here, every day, waiting." Emily turned toward the open bay door. The evening air was cool against her wet cheeks. Behind her, and Robert stayed where he was, hands at his sides, watching her go. She reached her car, paused with her hand on the door handle, and glanced back once. And he was still standing there, small against the vastness of the shop, lit by the fluorescent glow. For the first time, the ghost didn't disappear when she looked away, and he stayed. And in that staying, something cracked open inside her, small, fragile, but real. A beginning, maybe, or at least the possibility of one. And the first call came 3 days after the confrontation at the shop. Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she washed dishes, and suds sliding down her dark brown arms. Robert's number, saved tentatively as Dad, with a question mark flashed on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering, and, "Hello, Emily, it's me. I didn't want to push, but I found an old photo album. If it's okay, I could send you a couple pictures. Just to look at. No pressure." And she hesitated, water dripping from her fingers. "Send them." Minutes later, her phone lit up with images, a grainy Polaroid of baby Emily in a tiny yellow sun hat, and held by a much younger white Robert, his smile uncertain but genuine against her dark skin. Another of her at maybe 2, and toddling across a lawn with chubby arms outstretched, curls wild. The last showed Linda in the background, laughing, unaware of the camera, black mother, white father, and biracial child caught in a moment before everything broke. Emily stared until her eyes burned. She didn't reply right away. But she didn't delete them either, and a week later Jake came home from school with his favorite remote control car in pieces. Tommy kicked it during recess. He said, bottom lip trembling, and medium, brown skin flushed from holding back tears. Emily promised to glue it, but the motor was fried. That evening her phone buzzed again. A text from Robert, and, "If Jake has a broken toy, I fix things for a living. No strings. Happy look at it if you bring it by. Or I can come to you. Your call." Then she stared at the message for 10 minutes. Then she typed tomorrow after school, our house 4 p.m. He arrived exactly on time in a clean flannel shirt and jeans, and toolbox in hand. Jake answered the door, curious but shy. Robert knelt to his level. "Hey buddy, I hear you've got a speedy car that needs help." Jake glanced at his mom, and Emily nodded. "It's okay." Robert spent 20 minutes on the living floor, Jake cross-legged beside him, handing tools. When the car whirred back to life, and Jake's face lit up like Christmas. "You're like a superhero," Robert chuckled softly. "Just an old mechanic who hates seeing good toys stay broken." He didn't linger, and he thanked Emily for letting him in, said goodbye to Jake, and left quietly. No lingering hugs. The text started small after that, and a good morning message with a photo of sunrise over the garage. A funny meme about bad coffee. Emily replied at first with one-word answers. Then sentences, then questions, and, "How was your day?" "Busy." Slowly the thread grew. One Saturday the kitchen faucet finally gave out, dripping for months, now a steady stream, and Emily was on her knees with a wrench when the doorbell rang. Robert stood there with a new cartridge and plumber's tape, and saw your story on the neighborhood app about the leak. "Thought I could help. If it's not welcome, I'll go." She stepped aside, and he fixed it in 15 minutes while Jake watched, asking 100 questions. Robert answered every one patiently. When he finished, he cleaned up every drop of water and wiped the counter and turned to leave. "Wait," Emily said. "Stay for coffee?" He looked surprised, then grateful. They sat at the table, awkward at first, and Jake chattered about school. Robert listened like every word mattered. When Jake ran off to play, silence settled. Emily spoke first. "I still get angry sometimes, and thinking about all the years you weren't here. Mom's face when she talked about you. She said white men don't stay for black families, and she carried that bitterness until the end." Robert nodded. "I deserve that anger. I carry it too. Every time I think about what I missed, your first day of school, and teaching you to ride a bike, being there when Tom died. It hurts. But I'm not running anymore. If you need to yell, yell. If you need space, I'll give it. And just let me keep showing up." She looked at him, really looked. The lines around his blue, gray eyes were deeper than in the old photos, but the eyes themselves were steady. "Sorry." Over the next months, the small actions stacked like bricks rebuilding something broken, and Robert came over every other weekend to help with chores, mowing the lawn, fixing the porch step, painting the fence Jake had drawn on with markers. He brought stories, and how he learned to fix engines from his uncle, how he named the shop after the first car he ever restored. He never pushed for more than she offered, and old hurts resurfaced in quiet moments. One evening, while they sat on the porch watching Jake ride his bike, Emily said, "Mom never forgave you. She died still carrying it, and she told me the world would never let a white man and a black woman raise a child together without pain." Robert's voice was soft. "I know. I wrote her a letter once, and years ago. Never sent it. Said I was sorry. Said I loved her. Said I loved you. I wish she'd read it." Emily reached over and touched his hand, just for a second, and she might have, in her own way. He didn't cry, but his shoulders shook once. Jake's questions came too. One night while Robert was helping with homework, Jake looked up, and, "Grandpa Bob, why do people ask if I'm adopted? Or why my skin is lighter than Mom's but darker than yours?" Robert glanced at Emily, then knelt beside Jake, and, "Because you're a perfect mix of both sides, kid. Your mom's strength, your dad's smile, a little bit of me, a little bit of your Grandma Linda, and..." People stare because they don't always know what to do with beautiful things they haven't seen before. But you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, and you just have to be you. Jake nodded slowly, then hugged him. "I like being me." Forgiveness didn't arrive in a rush. It crept in through cracked doors, and through Jake calling him Grandpa Bob. Without thinking, through Emily laughing at one of his bad jokes, through the way he always left before overstaying, and giving her room to breathe. One night, after Jake was asleep, Emily texted him a single photo, the three of them from that afternoon, Jake on Robert's shoulders, and Emily smiling beside them. Robert replied almost instantly, "Best picture I've ever seen." She typed back, "Come over tomorrow. Stay for dinner." He did. And slowly, and painfully, beautifully, the family that had been torn apart by fear, race, and regret began, piece by small piece, to mend. And the check cleared on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Emily stood at the teller window, heart pounding against her ribs, as the bank officer confirmed the deposit, and $50,000, no holds, no questions. She walked out into sunlight that felt warmer, brighter, more forgiving than it had in years. And that same afternoon she drove to the mortgage office, handed over a cashier's check covering every overdue payment, plus 6 months ahead, and watched the loan officer's professional mask crack into genuine surprise. "You're all clear, Miss Thompson," he said, stamping the papers. "The house is yours again, and no more notices." Emily cried in the parking lot, not loud sobs, but quiet, grateful tears that left her lighter. When she picked Jake up from school, and she told him over ice cream cones, "We're staying, buddy. This is our home forever." Jake's medium, brown eyes went wide. "Really? No moving?" And, "Really?" She hugged him so tight he squealed, curls tickling her cheek. Robert came over that weekend with a toolbox and a flat of strawberry plants, and thought the backyard could use something sweet, he said. While Emily watched from the porch, he and Jake knelt in the dirt together, digging holes and patting soil around fragile roots. Jake's small hands got muddy. Robert showed him how to water without drowning the plants. By the end of the afternoon, the two of them were laughing about how the strawberries would taste better, because they'd grown them themselves. And, "Grandpa Bob," Jake said casually as he handed Robert a trowel. The word slipped out like it had always been waiting. Robert froze for half a second, then smiled, and the kind of smile that reached his blue, gray eyes and stayed. He ruffled Jake's curls. "Sounds pretty good to me, kid." That evening, and while they sat on the porch steps watching the sun set, Jake looked up at Robert. "Mom says I'm a mix of lots of things. Black like her, a little white like you, and all me. Why do some kids say I'm not black enough or white enough?" Robert glanced at Emily, then knelt to Jake's level. "And because people sometimes don't know what to do with beautiful things they haven't seen a lot of. But you don't have to pick a side, Jake. You get to be all of it, and your mom's strength, your grandma Linda's laugh, a little bit of my stubbornness, and everything your dad gave you. That's not enough. That's more than enough," and Jake nodded slowly, then hugged him. "I like being more than enough." Emily felt something warm and permanent shift inside her chest. The small actions kept coming, and Robert taught Jake how to change a bike tire, how to read an engine's hum, how to tell time by the position of the sun. He brought over old tools and wrenches that had belonged to his uncle, and let Jake keep a small socket set in his room. On quiet evenings the three of them sat on the porch swing, and Robert telling stories about cars he'd rebuilt, Jake asking endless questions, Emily listening with a cup of tea warming her hands, and, with the mortgage caught up and breathing room in the budget, Emily quit the night cleaning job. She started small, catering platters for neighborhood parties, and using soul food recipes her black mother had taught her, collard greens simmered low and slow, mac and cheese with extra sharp cheddar, and sweet potato pie with just the right cinnamon. Word spread through the community. Soon she was booking birthday lunches, baby showers, church potlucks, and she turned the garage into a prep kitchen. Robert helped install shelves and a second fridge. Jake designed the business cards on his school computer, and Emily's home kitchen, made with love and legacy. The first big order came from the local elementary school for Teacher Appreciation Day. Emily worked late, and Robert stayed to help chop vegetables and wash dishes. When the last tray was loaded into her car at midnight, he looked at her and said, "Your mom would be proud, and I know I am." Emily met his eyes. "I think she'd want us all here, together." Forgiveness didn't erase the past, it simply stopped owning the future, and there were still hard days. Emily sometimes woke from dreams where her mother stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, saying, "He left us. White men always leave." She'd sit up, and, heart racing, and text Robert at 3 in the morning. "Still hurts sometimes." His replies were always simple, "I know. I'm still sorry. I'm still here." And he was, and he moved into the small guest room 6 months later, not as a tenant, but as family. No big announcement, it just happened. He paid rent anyway, and slipped it under her door in an envelope labeled, "For the strawberries." Emily tore it up and made him keep it for Jake's college fund. One crisp autumn evening, and they hosted a barbecue in the backyard. Neighbors came, black, white, everyone. Jake's friends ran around with sparklers, and Robert manned the grill in an apron that said, "World's okayest grandpa." Emily watched from the porch steps as Jake climbed onto Robert's shoulders to hang fairy lights in the trees, and laughter floated on the cool air. Later, after everyone left and Jake was asleep, Emily and Robert sat on the swing with mugs of hot cider, and the strawberry plants had borne fruit that summer, sweet, small, perfect. They'd eaten the last of them that morning. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? And for coming back, for staying, for giving us this." Robert looked at the house, the fresh paint on the porch, the new flowers along the walkway, and the warm light spilling from every window. "I spent 35 years thinking I didn't deserve a second chance. Turns out the chance wasn't for me. It was for you, and for Jake. For the family I almost destroyed, across every line that tried to keep us apart." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're not destroyed. We're healing." And he wrapped an arm around her, tentative at first, then sure. "Yeah," he whispered, "we are." The house stood quiet around them, holding every memory old and new, and the height chart on the doorframe now had fresh pencil marks, Jake at 4'8", and below it, in Robert's careful handwriting, "Grandpa Bob, finally home." And second chances didn't come with guarantees. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to open the door when they knock, they come with strawberries, laughter, and soul food on the table, and a family pieced back together stronger than before. Across racial lines, across regret, across everything that once tried to tear them apart,